Let's open our Bibles to Matthew 24. We're going through the 7 big events that are on God's calendar, the 7 final events through the end of time as we know it. And we started at the end of them and have backed progressively up. We're at the 4th one, which is the second coming of Christ. And what I'd like to lodge in your mind this evening is that the second coming of Christ is for a reason that often we don't think about. We just think it's happening. But in Matthew 24 and verses 21 and 22, we see this 4th event as part of a bigger plan that God has, and for a reason that sometimes we don't think about. Because the second coming of Christ is the single greatest visible expression of God's power to the entire earth since He flooded the planet. Now, when you think about the flood of Noah, that was a big display of power because everyone except Noah, his wife, and his 3 sons and their wives, every other human being perished as they saw the demonstration of God's power. And so this is the second most visible expression of God's power. And it's tied to the tribulation. And Matthew 24 tells us that the reason Jesus comes when He does is to cut short the tribulation. If He did not come when He came, or when He's going to come, if He did not come at that moment, there wouldn't be any people left. You understand that's what Jesus said. If I didn't cut this thing short, no one would survive. That's an amazing thing to think about. It's only happened one other time that almost everyone was killed, and that was the flood. And that's why the second coming, Jesus always equated it. He said, like it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be in the coming of the Son of Man. God intervened the first time with water, the second time with Christ's second coming, and with fire as He reconstitutes the earth as a part of His plan. Well, basically, in verse 21, Jesus describes the tribulation as the final global Holocaust. He's sitting, as you remember, on the side of the Mount of Olives. He's looking at the most visible representation of Judaism, of the worship of the true God. If you read anything about history and Herod's temple, Herod took the reconstruction of the Solomonic temple that was done by Zerubbabel, and he enlarges it immensely. Herod the king, as in the baby-killing, magi-visited king of Israel at the time of Christ's birth, was actually just a grandiose builder. He always built to defy nature. He built a palace out into the ocean, into the Mediterranean Sea. He built his own peninsula, put it out there so he could have his boat come in, no one could see him, and he had a freshwater, gigantic, Olympic-sized swimming pool out in the ocean. I mean, he was against nature. He built another mountain, perched palace right on the edge of a mountain that had natural air conditioning. It was built over the Dead Sea, but because of the convection currents of evaporation and the whole way that the water would evaporate and rise with the desert breeze, it was naturally in the middle of 120 degrees, always 72 degrees, because he built it out where the sweeping rise of the air would be, and that was called Masada. He built his own mountain, all kinds of stuff, but the temple was the greatest of all. The temple that Jesus is looking at in Matthew 24, the first 3 verses, was built on this incredible 40-acre platform that has the single largest building blocks that we know of in the world. There are some paralleling it north of there, but they are the largest. They're 475 metric tons each. And when groups go through there and walk next to them, you can take your credit card out, and you can't get your credit card between any of the places where the blocks meet. They are so tightly laid together. In spite of the fact they're 60 feet long and 15 feet deep and about 12 feet high of solid stone, those gigantic stones, you can't get hardly a jackknife between them. But on top of all that building, He covered it with gold and all the votive offerings of the Jews. And so when Jesus sat there, it was probably blinding the light of the sun against this glittering gold and white limestone temple. And He starts talking about the tribulation from the end of the world, from that setting. And what He describes is that humanity is just coming on to extinction because the tribulation, God takes back His restraint. Remember, it says the one who restrains will be pulled back, the Holy Spirit who restrains evil in this world because of the church being here and because we're going forth with the light of the gospel. There's a restraining influence on the world. It's not as bad as it could be. But when he pulls out that restraining influence, the restrainer, the world begins to be as evil as it was at the time of the flood, where every imagination of man's heart, Genesis 6:5, was only evil continually. It gets that way again. And humanity begins to destroy humanity, and God's judgments begin to be poured out on the evil, and that combination makes it like the final apocalypse. What's amazing is that we believe, and the Bible convinces us, that we will not be here during the time of the great wrath of God. That's what the harpazo, the Greek word rapture, is a Latin word, rapturos. But the Greek word is harpazo, which is like harpoon, and it's like being snatched out. It's like something that falls in the fire and you grab it out of there. That's the word for the rapture, because he's keeping us from the time of his wrath. But the amazing thing for us Americans is we think that means we're not going to go through any tribulations, hardly at all. And what is happening, if you study closely, the setting of Matthew 24 is going to be already going in the world, and we're going to be here, and there's going to be great persecution of believers before the Lord takes us out, because there's going to be hatred and animosity, and then he's going to take us out. So that's just a setting as we prepare to survive the storms before the final storm. Well, Matthew 24, verses 21 and 22, for the third time tonight. Let's stand up, okay? And you won't have to stand up anymore. You can just sit, stay all night if you want. But Matthew 24, follow along as I read, and then we'll pray. Jesus said this, "For then there will be great tribulation, such has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor ever shall be." This is the final, ultimate, greatest Holocaust. Here is the key for the second coming. "And unless those days were shortened," King James cut short, unless those days were stopped by the Lord, by his coming, "no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." Wow. The purpose of the second coming is to cut short those days so that every human being doesn't die on this planet.